morning to you on this Monday, and it's going to be a real busy week here in Mason County, Spencer. This will be kind of your second foray into the July month of Mason County, and a lot of things we talk about are about folks from perhaps the bigger burgs, the Seattles and things like that. They come, we're so blessed to have beautiful area. This is where we live. It's our backyard. You look out, you see the canal, you see everything. It's just gorgeous. So folks come here, and they come here to recreate. And when the influx in population over the weekends, over this 4th of July holiday, it's a Thursday, so a lot of folks are going to be taking Wednesday through Monday off, basically. So a lot of folks are going to be on the roadways, and a lot of folks come into town, and they may not treat our area with the same sort of respect that we treat it because we live here. The Sheriff's Sit Down, presented by our Community Credit Union. Great folks there. Casey Salisbury is here this morning. Good morning, sir.
Morning. Good
And
morning.
you know this is a thing. You deal with it all the time, the folks who come in. Tell us a little bit about what are some of the things you guys do to help remind the out-of-towners about playing nice and being nice to our community.
It's really challenging because the first time you meet some of those out-of-towners is on something that our people got called to.
Yeah.
And it's not always out-of-towners either.
Sure.
We hear out on the South Shore all the time about the out-of-towners and how fast they drive in the speed zones. And then we go out and do traffic enforcement because somebody's so upset about it. And we go out there and guess who we stop? The local people. And claiming that it's somebody else. The boating issues are always, many years ago, I mean, even up till now, many of the larger burgs, as you call them, cities or other counties, have put some pretty serious restrictions on type of boating.
Yeah.
Well, guess where they go? Because we don't have those same restrictions. We do have some restrictions, and it's been back and forth across the commission's chamber a number of times on, how many feet from this or how far out or how much waves or all those kind of things have been set and changed and rechanged to try to make everybody happy. But yeah, when you get an influx of people, and oftentimes when somebody's from a larger city or they're from a city environment, they're expecting the same firefighting and law enforcement services they get in those cities, and we don't have it. We're much more rural than they are. The response times are different, and they're wondering why it takes so long. Or as we come up on the 4th, there'll be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of calls. Some people just want to, point the finger at the neighbor and try to get him into trouble or whatever. And the number of those calls is absolutely overwhelm all fire and law enforcement services.
You just made me think about something. We were talking last week with Shelton Police Chief Moody and Mike Patty from Central Mason Fire, also the Shelton Fire Marshal. And we were talking about who you call and when you call. And I would imagine if somebody calls and the conversation goes to be about either physical violence or something to that nature versus somebody's shooting off a sparkler in my backyard, all the calls will be handled. Some will be handled at a different priority rate. Is that right?
You try to do that. I was at the other forum that you were at one and I was at another, and it's interesting. I brought that very subject up, and I mentioned that Ross, our emergency service director, it's been great having Ross in that position because Ross was a deputy sheriff before, and he can kind of separate fact from fiction. But what happens is if somebody doesn't get the response they want, they up their ante on what they perceive to be going on and tell a dispatcher that in order to get somebody there, and you get there and it's
that's
either...
kind of what my question was leading to.
Yes, it happens constantly. We have areas where we've had calls that somebody will call and somebody shows up and they have to where they're summertime lots and they're maybe having a campfire and somebody doesn't particularly like that neighbor or they don't like their picnic table or whatever it is, and they call to make a complaint against them just to get something started, just to show that they can. While we're out there trying to deal with some neighborly dispute between adults that should know better, we've got an overturned kayak in the water with people in the water that we should be dealing with. So it gets very, very challenging when people aren't either accurate with what they're seeing or they're not being honest about the type of call it is, because if they feel like they're not getting a response, then all of a sudden it gets more grandiose. just to try to get somebody there sooner. We only have so many people. There will be. I hate to say how many calls, because if I say one number, somebody say it wasn't that, but a tremendously increased volume of calls. The dispatchers, and it has to go out to the supervisor, has to sit there and listen and decide on the priorities of those calls. And you can be en route to one area in the North County for something that seems like a very large priority call that's going to require a multiple person response, and then something of a higher priority comes out at the other end, and now you're going to the other end of that call. And something starts at the other end, it's higher than that priority, and you're scooting around the county trying to cover all of these. And there's certainly, by morning, there is not enough law enforcement or fire people to make it to all those calls. And I know that some people say, well, they're very critical of the law enforcement side of it, but last year, one of the issues we had, and I brought up at that meeting, was that our services were so overwhelmed last year because of the smoke, the fires that were occurring. Most of it was coming out of Canada, that I actually went up in an airplane because we had so many calls for service. We didn't have enough firefighters and law enforcement to check on all the calls. And people were saying, well, there's this fire, but we were getting there and weren't seeing things. And so I was called by the fire chiefs and said, hey, can you get a plane and go up? And we did, and there weren't any. Right? People were seeing the smoke coming in from other places, and were for sure, they were 100% sure that they saw this. And, we don't want people not to call, but accuracy and verification helps us a great deal, because it was overwhelming the fire services last year when they called us.
Is it a big percentage of kind of nuisance calls, like intoxication? We're talking a lot about fireworks and the dangers of fires and things like that, but I would imagine on 4th of July, a lot of just people being kind of dumb with alcohol and stuff.
Yeah,
being reckless.
We work with a lot of the ask a park ranger sometime, and I have a lot of friends that are park rangers in the law enforcement side in national and state parks, and I really feel bad for the parks, because the park is really a microcosm of what's going on in the rest of society. But now you're putting people within 8 feet of each other. Some of these trailer parks, trailers are backed in there much closer than they would be if they just stayed at home. They don't like somebody else's music or whatever. It gets really challenging, and when you throw intoxicating substances on top of that, it gets really out. It's really tough to manage. I know the park rangers, it's really challenging for them in tight quarters with, the parks are completely packed, or people drive fast through the park. It's the same thing that's going out on, in the rest of society. And it's not just Mason County. Everybody says, oh, you're picking on Mason County. It's every sheriff in the state will tell you in their counties, or police chief, that on these holiday weekends, and as you say, some people, when they're not out of their hometown, or where they normally stay at, they look at ours as a place where they can just come down and do whatever they want.
Sure. And
they're very offended when they're contacted. Well, I bought a summer house down here on the lake so I could come down here and do whatever I want. And we hear that very thing. Well, the laws are the same here as they are in the big city. You still have to follow the laws, and they don't feel like they have to sometimes, and they get very indignant.
One of the places we talked about, I don't know if it was on air or off air last week when Trevor was here, was that Party Rock area, Lake Cushman. So tell us a little bit about the backstory of where that is for listeners who may not be aware, and for parents or families who have maybe gone there in their youth. It's not the same Party Rock as it has been in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, right?
Well,
I mean,
it's the same rock.
It's the same rock, obviously. It's a big rock.
It hasn't gone anywhere.
But the amount of people that go there, and there's been some pretty severe incidents that have happened over the years.
Well, it's just like incidents in Steel Bridge. Some of those places, if you weren't from around here, and the internet's really created a word of mouth, I guess you'd say, or information out there about these places and able to find them. If you grew up around here, these places were kind of known to you maybe if you grew up here. But if you were from out of town, you didn't maybe know that they existed. And now it becomes an internet sensation to go to these places and stand on the edge of the bridge or whatever it is. You'll see all kinds of people doing crazy things up there. And now everybody knows exactly where it's at and how to get there.
Yeah.
And it used to seem like it was further out of town. And the community is growing out to some of these places, and they're easier to get to. And people do there. And the Party Rock that you're talking about, one that always concerns me, and if you're not from around here, you may not know, and even if you told people, they don't understand, that lake up there it's created by a dam, and that dam regulates how deep the lake is. And sometimes the lake water is down and sometimes it's up. And if you've ever been up there, when the water is way down, you're going to see various stumps and other geologic things underneath that water. And people just make the assumption that you can jump in the water and you're just got forever to go. And when that lake has been dropped and they're not aware of it, because it's kind of tough to see it, you're jumping off you're jumping off something that's very high in the air, and you think that it's all water underneath you, and 4 inches underneath the water is another rock structure, and they land on it, and then we end up there, where they get down and crawl underneath these things and don't realize they're kind of cavernous. If there's no water in there, you can go underneath, and it's like little caves, and you get underneath that thing in the water, and you can't get back out. So it's tough. I mean, it's really tough to get people to be reasonable and use common sense.
That's tough stuff there. So the 4th of July is Thursday. There will be heightened and increased patrols as best as the Sheriff's Department here in the county, as well as Shelton Police, are able to do. So just be
Jeff,
aware.
One other thing I would add in there that's it's not, well, it's a people problem, but please be aware that on the 4th, the issues that we have with animals.
Oh, sure.
I mean, people will end up with dogs and cats at their house that they never thought that they had, or their dogs and cats are gone. And if you can, be patient with those animals. And if you can look at the tag and if you can figure out where they go, rather than hundreds and hundreds of people calling us trying to figure out where an animal's been released from, because once those things start going off, the dogs and cats and other animals, it really scares them, and they end up getting out of their yards unintentionally, and they will just keep running and running and running until they find someplace safe, or where they think is safe, and it might be your house or somebody else's house. And then people call us and want us to figure out how to deliver them back or take them in, and we don't have the facilities to take those dogs in the first place, or cats. But also, sometimes it takes a long time. If you can figure those out, it's really helpful.
Not a bad idea to get a collar with a tag. Yeah. You can get those laser printed collars and tags now just about anywhere.
Because it really is problematic, and I really feel sorry when we've had people call and say, I've got somebody's dog is on my porch, or somebody's dog is in the back of my garage and it won't come out. What do I do? Yeah. Well, it's in there because the garage door was left open, and it was for that dog was the safest place to go, and they're buried in there. They don't want to come out with all the noises. So just be aware that it's really stressful for these animals. Sure. It's really stressful.
Sure. Sometimes we'll give them tranquilizers. The vet will give
we do that with
doses,
our dog.
Just to keep them calm. Because even if they're not going to get out, it makes them really neurotic especially if you're in an area with a lot of these things.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
it's real tough on them. So it's just something to keep in mind, because we get a lot of calls on that at the 911 center. And be patient with the animals.
We used to have a pretty active, especially on the 5th through the 7th-ish, lost and found pets page on the website. Still people use that, but Facebook does have some Mason County and Shelton lost pet pages.
That's helpful when they can show a photograph of the animal, and people can get on there and look. But
so
just be patient with them.
Maybe some tags if possible.
Tags are wonderful, but it's just challenging because they're not going to find their way back. They're scared to death. So.
Yeah. Sheriff Salisbury, good to see you. You have a good holiday, and stay safe out there for sure.
Okay, thanks.
The Sheriff Sit Down, brought to you by this and every week.